are just a few of the schools that have ebbed and flowed during the period.
まず最初に、任期を迎えた理事の再任案について、決議をいただきました。今後6月中に
マイク変えます。すいません。少々お待ちください。
So please wait for the switch of the microphone.
相談者、事務総長の武藤敏郎です。それでは冒頭総長の方から議事報告お願いいたします。
So today we are seeing some of the process. The first one is about the reappointment of the decision makers. From today,
マイク変えます。すいません。
starting from the middle of June, we are going to uphold a management meeting. At the same time, all the procedures about the selections of the board members of the GOC is also going to continue. The second item I'd like to report to you is that as a corporation and committee, we are under the management of the law, and we should abide by the law. And I believe all the following decisions made by the committee is also going to be approved by the law. In 2019, in the year 2020, we postponed the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. That is a decision based on the expansions of the COVID-19 confirmed cases in Tokyo Prefecture. And in the past year, we have reorganized and readjusted our policies in order to adjust to the COVID-19 situation. So for the fourth part of the decisions that we are going to make, and for the details about the organizations of the Tokyo 2020 Olympic and Paralympic, GOC is going to be the executive bodies, and it's also going to be a very important decision makers, and for all the stakeholders. So this time, the IOC, IPC, GOC, GPC, together with the government and the Ministry of the Olympic Management, the sixth party is going to make the decision together, and then we are going to report to the public. That is the decision-making mechanism. I believe we are also going to try our best to reutilize the resources in our nation. And I think the budget is also going to follow the strict management of this sixth party. For the stakeholders, we are generally going to arrange some of the bosses picks the stakeholders ups and downs. And we have also signed up the supplier contract with some of the bus corporations. So that is the briefing from the budget side. So the next item I'd like to report to you is about the media group. So for the preparations of the media group, first, on the 28th of last month, we have upheld the meeting about the media corporations for the Olympic Games. And during that meeting, we have also decided the media corporations and the hospital corporations. And these groups is also responsible for the representatives of the athletes and their impacts. And then later on, we have reached a consensus. That is also something I want to report to you. So the next item is about the Tokyo Olympic Game. According to the research that we have made so far, since we are making the Olympic preparation in a very smooth manner for all the
都内における1週間平均の新規
participations of the
重症
overseas visitors, it is going to be around 95,000, and I believe 50% of them has been inoculated.
限定的ではないかというそういう
So
数字であります。
I think this is information based on the current situation,
でこの試算は出国前
and this calculation
や入国後4日間連
also
続
includes
その後
when the athletes
検査を行うといったような
aboard the airplane and depart from their own country, they are going to went through a round of the PCR test, and if they arrive in Japan, they are also going to went through another nucleic acid test. And for the management of the vaccines,
ておりませんので
since we have not included that into our budget,
厳しい
and for the exact measures of that side,
我々
since it's going to be a very harsh result,
教授自身もその後のさまざまな
I was discussing with Professor Nagamura.
的になる可能性があるということをおっしゃる
I think that it is very likely that we are going to ask the athletes to be inoculated in Japan for those who have not injected. And moving forward, I'm going to introduce you the information about the medical workers.
割を確保済みであります。残りの1割につきましては
90% of the medical workers has been injected with the vaccine, and 90% of them is coming from the Japanese Medical Association, and the rest 10% is coming from the professional sports related doctors, what we call sports doctors. And they are going to be responsible for the sport related injuries. And for the nurses, based on the current situations, 80% of them is coming from the National Nurses Association, and for the rest, 20%.
東京都看護協会等と調整を進めて
They
いく
are
ご報告いたし
some of the nurses that we have been reallocated from other different prefectures other than Tokyo Prefecture.
医師も看護師もともに今月
So no matter from the doctors or the nurses,
の確保の見通しが
starting from this
という
month,
ふうに考えております。
they are going to went through a series of the tests and also screenings and also inoculations. I think that I'm also going to report to you the athletes.
接種の予定
We believe 80% of the athletes has also made their appointment. And for the Japanese athletes, they should be under the management of the GOC.
1日より
So starting from the
されたということをご報告いたしました。
10th of the June this month, the Japanese athletes is going to start their inoculations.
者へのワクチン接種について
And for the volunteers and overseas volunteers,
職域の接
starting from the 21st of this month,
種を踏まえまして
they are also going to start their
いきたいと
vaccination procedure.
いたしました。
That is the decision that we have made from the GOC.
するメディア関係者への感染策については都民国民
So
の
for
関心を
the
高め
overseas medias,
報告いたしました。
we have, I'd like to report to you to several different measures.
もかけてきた行動管理、健康管
That
理
is to say, we have 3 different principles guiding the overseas broadcasting. That is to say, we are going to manage the broadcasting activity in a healthy and safety measures.
指定した活動計画書の提出のほか、新たに誓約書の提出についても記載しているところ
And
であり
I believe that based on the previous contact that they have submitted to the GOC, they should also submit another new guaranteeing letter which is guaranteeing their health.
活動が必要な場合、3日間
And when they are conducting some of the activities in Japan,
の監督のもと、国内在
they
住
should report all their close contact in Japan.
4日目以降の活動を認めているところであります。
And 4 days before any single activities for this foreign journalist who is in Japan, they should report their planned activities 4 days before.
や GPS 等により
And I also
管理を行う方針であります。
required all the friends from the overseas media to wear the GPS. And this is also going to provide a very in-time requirement for their activities in Japan. And for the relevant stakeholders, including those who provided the catering or the hotels, we also have a very strict requirement. They should try their best to work together under our leadership, and we are cutting the number down from 300,000 to 150 hotels, which is going to be accommodating. And as I have noted that on the 10th of June, the first foreign athlete group, which is the Australia women's soccer team, is going to arrive in Japan. It is going to unveil the foreign athletes' journey to Japan, and we are going to let the Australia's women's soccer team to report their day-to-day activity to the GOC. And the moving item is that I'm going to introduce you is the correlations between the confirmed cases of the Kanagawa Prefecture toward the together with the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. And we are going to double check the tents and the makeshift hospitals that is standing in the Kanagawa Prefecture. And we are also going to try our best to rearrange some of the cases. Since last month, Mr. Sakamura has been appointed as the president. I like to report to you according to the third chapter of the playbook. That is a very detailed chapter about the overseas infected cases and also what kind of rule of the athletes and overseas visitors should obey when they arrive in Japan. I suggest all the overseas athletes and stakeholders to read the chapter 3 in the playbook. For the distinguished opening ceremony, we are trying our best to utilize all kinds of technologies to support the opening ceremony. And we are also rechange some of the materials into the plastics. And we are also going to recycle the usage of the plastic. And for the clothing, we are actually designing some of the brand new clothing accommodating to the modern Olympics. It is very useful when the athlete is climbing and when the athlete is going down. Of course, this clothing is being motivated by the traditional element in Japan, and it is also going to be a perfect mix of the traditional Japanese culture together with the modern Olympic feature. Definitely, we have a lot of callings from different athletes. And since we are researching into that field, we are going to discuss with the relevant parties. Definitely, we have a lot of participants, including the studio musicians and among other different participants. And together with the 6 different musical pieces and the Japanese music itself, we really want to kindly invite you to hear the Olympic relevant music. That is the explanation from my side. And later on, I'm going to start the suggestion exchanges to all of you. One important suggestion
ご報告
is about the management of the committee.
しましたので、アーカイブというものは保管するということも大事だけども、利活用
Although it is very important to keep an eye on that,
そういうことをしっかりやってほしいと。
we should
とそれから大会終了
be sensitive to all the elements.
宣言などが、仮に
We have announced several different
報告が出るといった
claimers about the equality.
というようなご心配がありました。
We are also going to see whether this is useful or not.
といったようなやり取りがありました。それから、もう一つはですね、
Another problem or question we'd like to talk about
が行われているわけですけれども、
is that since Japan is
向けて
opening up the Tokyo 2020 Olympic and Paralympic,
陰性証明
so before the
が不十分でですね、
athletes is
なか
boarded
ったと
on the plane, is it necessary for the athletes to give the certification of health?
だというような、
I think it is one thing that needs to be remembered by all the athletes and visitors.
その同じ
The next item is that
外国から日本で、日本に来る
for all those who are coming from other foreign countries into Japan, they should remember that this is an international
で
game,
は陰性
games,
しかしその後日本に入
and we should also be clear about the infections in the airplanes and also the infections near the airport.
この保健所が記録を調べてですね、
I
濃厚接触
suggest all of you to keep a record of the
かなりの
health
濃厚接触者に
procedures and submissions that we have made.
発症したアスリートの国
For those of the
ない
athletes who might experience an outbreak, who might
濃厚接
get
触
the COVID-19, we cannot transport them back to their mother country immediately. That is one major challenge facing in front of us.
重要な
And from today, we are going to research into that scenario and provide a all-rounded preparation for that kind of emergency.
会場での飲食について、いろんなことが報道
Another question is about the food and water and also
話がありました。でこれは
in
です
the
ねまだ、今月中に、
game center.
こういうことで
And starting from that,
ないということを
starting from this month, we are going to
それから
work on that perspective. That is to say, to re-accommodate, to rethink about the
まだなんと
catering situations.
下げるような時期ではない、今月中に決めるということなんですけれども、その際、中田准教授のようなシミュレーションが、参考になるであろうと、国民の方々にどのような結果にしろ、その結果を説明するにあたってですね、そういう客観的なことを踏まえて説明が
We have not decided the details.
といったご意見でありました。それから、ちょっといろんな話が飛んで恐縮ですけれども、選手村に選手は入れるわけですけれども、選手についてくるスタッフ、コーチとか、トレーナーみたいな人たちですけれども、これが必ず選手村に入るとは限らない、選手村の外に宿泊することもあると、そういうことで、この行動管理についてはしっかりやってもらう必要があるのではないかといったようなことでございました。それから、国内メディア、外国メディアの人がワクチンを打ってくるっていう話が、あるけれども、国内メディアについて、大会関係者としてワクチンを打つといったようなことは考えないのかといったようなことがありまして、これは先ほど申し上げた通り、我々としては
All the journalists who is going into Japan to be vaccinated before they went into Japan. They are going into Japan. That is still under discussion.
観客が来られなく
since we have no tourists coming from other different countries,
状況を踏まえると映像配信
and we need to, based on the situations of the current information that we have so far,
やるべきだと少なくとも
and we should try our best to
比べても
implement all the prevention and control measures.
ゆえに映像配信をしっかりやる必要があるのではないかと
And based on that measures, we should implement the procedures.
そんなところでございます以上です
That is the briefings of my report. Thank you very much for your listening. Thank you very much.
オンラインで参加の方はいつもの通り
Now the floor is open up for questions. Definitely we have the questions from the sites, and we also welcome the questions via video link. So the first, we like to give the floor for those of the distinguished journalist who is joining us on site.
すみません、産経新聞森本です。ワクチン
Thank you very much. I'm Morimoto from the Industrial Economist.
丸川大臣の方がですね、国会で大会ボランティア
Today I hear the report from Minister Marukawa.
旨の答弁を
She has talked
で
that
今
she has talked about that we are still under discussions about the vaccinations
ワクチン
in Japan.
云々も重要なことだという認識で
You,
今検討しているというようなお
President,
話
you
を
ask
今され
all
た
the
んですけ
foreign
れども
medias into Japan needs to be vaccinated. So how about the Japanese media? Should the Japanese
いわゆる国内の大会関係者
journalists all
できるだ
be
け多く今
inoculated,
別枠で提供さ
or
れている
should
のは
we try our best to expand the coverage of the vaccine in Japan?
国内メディアも含めて
And should
い
we
わゆる本格
include
的に検討
the
しているという
injections of the
理解でよろしい
vaccine
んでしょうか
not only for the foreign journalists but also the Japanese journalists?
ただ
Definitely we are discussing about that.
2万人分は特別枠としていただきましたでやはり
I should say that the inoculations for 20,000 people is not a very easy
さら
job.
にその2万をですね
We should also look at people coming from different countries.
でこれ今やっておりますけども可能性は
And something we should definitely do is that I think it is something that we are definitely going to do before the Olympic Games.
いずれにしても追加は可能だということでありますで
We are definitely going to add this item on the agenda. And for the volunteers,
立場の方には
because the volunteers is going to stand quite close with the athletes. That is to say, we are going to consider the volunteers just as the athletes. They are of the same importance. And for the overseas athletes and overseas media, it is going to be, we are going to came up with a national plan based on the plans that we set up for the overseas athletes and overseas media. Definitely, not only from the stakeholders of our meeting, we are discussing about the concrete requirement. Since we have not drawn any conclusions yet, and I think it is still very possible that we are going to add the items to require the friends from the Japanese media's journalists to also be inoculated. And we could see that this is still under discussion. That is the briefing from my side.
今日会長は6月中旬頃にもというようなお話を冒頭の挨拶でされてましたけど、その頃まで
Since
に
you
は
have noticed that starting from the middle of the May, as our president had said, we are going to start the contact with the overseas visitors. I think this is also being decided by the time slots before the openings of the Olympic Games. And we should also start the contact of the athletes. I think it's going to cost us about 1 week. And I believe all the inoculations is going to be finished before the openings of the Tokyo 2020 Olympic. And we hope that this could be opened up as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございます。他にいかがでしょうか。一ノ瀬さんどうぞ。
I am Miss Taylor from the Fuji Television. You mentioned about using the GPS on the overseas journalist. What do you think is the actual functions of the GPS? So how do you respond to that? So because So you are putting the GPS on the foreign journalist. Is it affecting the freedom of journalism or freedom of interview? I understand your question. Definitely, we have some of the rules for the freedom of the journalist, and this is very important. So the GPS is actually being used to decide or to observe where the journalist is going. Definitely, they go to some of the workplaces and non-workplaces. And so all of it needs to be managed. Definitely, we understand the difference between for the journalist who is going into the workplace and non-workplace, but it needs more discussion. I don't think the GPS is not affecting. I think the GPS tracker is not affecting the freedom of journalism. It is for the monitoring of the COVID-19 virus. It is some of the freedom that we have to give and for the prevention and control of COVID-19 virus.
オンラインのご質問の方は次の質問のやり取りの間にご入力を
So the next question is coming from online. So before the questions from online, we like to give the floor another question opportunity.
TBS ラジオの澤田と申します。
Thank you very much. I'm Solada from TBS. Since in today's opinion exchange meeting, we have finished some of the simulation models, and the simulation models is very helpful when we are trying to explain to the the people from our nation. And did you doing some of the simulations about the infectious models and what are the ratios of the infection? And if the infectious ratio is going up, how will the management committee give any decisions based on the algorithms and models? Today, I asked the President Hashimoto toward what kind of a way should we do. So we have not talked about that yet. We have not discussed about that yet. So that's the reason why I cannot answer you. Definitely, if there are some discussions with the environment, as a country, we are going to negotiate and discuss about that. And based on that result, we are going to further our discussions, and that is the probable result. Thank you very much for your question. And since we are receiving some of the questions from online, I think Mr. Sayasi, please quicken up your questions. So we have discussed about the problems of the GPS. So are you going to install the GPS on the smartphone? Or where do you install the GPS? In today's exchange, you have mentioned that a portion of the journalists enter into Japan might not have that GPS tracking. So because today we have not drawn any conclusions yet. So in the previous management committee, during their exchanges of the meetings, and we have talked about a different way of choices. For example, that is to say we have so many choices facing in front of us. But in today's opinion exchange, we just came to the conclusion And we don't have that
まず
in today's meeting or presser. So can you explain that further?
で時もお答えしましたけれども
So let me explain it once for all. Moving forward, as we are approaching the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, this kind of situation is going to appear
議論する場ではありません。
very frequently. We should think from a very overarching perspective of the successful openings of the Tokyo 2020. And I actually want to thank the support and understanding for all of you. And since you are talking about the GPS,
実は基本的にはおっしゃる通りなんですけども、貸与したものに関して
just as I have mentioned,
海外から入国される方には皆さんスマホを持ってきていただきます。それについて
I think all of those overseas journalists, if they enter into Japan, they are going to carry their smartphone together with them. Are we going to install their smartphone together with the GPS tracker? Mr. Maeda.
朝日新聞の前田と申します。2点確認あります。
So I am Ayada from the Asahi News. I have two things to confirm. The first one is that, as you have mentioned about the medical forces, I have listened to you latest information. And is it appropriate for us to prepare such a vast number of the medical workers? I think it is a decision made by the management committee.
医師については9割までまあすでに
For the doctors, 90% of them has been decided, and the resting
ぐ
10%.
らいっていうと医師の場合にはまあ百何十人っていうか200人弱なんですけど
So for the doctors, we have prepared around,
400名を超える
and since we have recruited
に応募いただいています
around
で
200doctors, and for the sports-related doctors, there's around 120 doctors. So what kind of decisions are we going to make?
ことがありますので、まあマッチングを
Since we have talked about that before,
あります。で今そのマッ
it
チ
is a very romantic situation,
ングで大体
and we are still trying to match the doctors with the nurses, with the athletes.
さらに、先ほどちょっと申し上げましたけども、医療責任者として
Just as I have mentioned, for the responsible persons of the medical situations, we should also try our best to figure out those who are responsible for the different venues.
これはもう
This kind of opinion has came up
100%
again and again, but later on we are going to address this question by 100%.
についてもですね
And for those of the nurses,
ぐらいはまあこれから
I think
ですけれども
20% of them needs to be decided.
今のワクチン接種の現場に影響を及ぼさないように
But frankly speaking,
東京都に
since the majority of the athletes is going to be
い
inoculated,
ろんなそのナースの方々のなんていうんですか
appearance of the nurses, how should I put
あ
it?
るようなんですね。看護協会ということとは別に
They should be about the relevant stakeholders.
などをして
We have these voices,
あの
and I think as long as we have
目処が立つ
moving forward, and within this month we are going to draw a conclusion about the doctors and nurses.
一部報道でVMO 自体もまあ組織委員会の方で追加でお願いしているみたいな報道を見たんですけど。
I think we have seen some of the relevant BMOs in the relevant venues. How do we respond to that?
あとその会場責任者については
So VMO means the
今
venue
月中に
manager.
目処が立つようなそういう話に聞いてい
I
ます
believe that in the middle of this month we are going to confirm the name list and also their different
満た
responsibilities.
しているわけではありませんけれど今月中には 満たせる。
And within this month, we are going to decide the situations about that.
のところで一般人への取材は禁止とあるんですが、これは15日目以降も適用されるものなんでしょうか。
So that is to say,
それはもう
after the 15th of the June, we are going to make sure that everybody is going to be
ここ
inoculated.
に書かれているものは14日間の部分というふうなことで考えればよろしい。
そういうことです。はい
So that is to say, the question is going to be decided on the around the 15th of the June. Yes.
現時点で全員の目処が立っているということでありまして、一部その
That is to say, currently you have decided the all the
もうすでに補充の
venue managers.
ということでございます。
じゃあ部屋の中でご質問ある方はどれぐらいしますか。
So do we have any other questions from the floor?
4人行ってそれでオンライン行きます。じゃあ前からごめんなさい順番に。
よろしくお願いします。増島です。先ほど冒頭の方でも会長の方からご発言があったんですが、情報発信を、積極的に、もっと皆さんに分かりやすくというお話なんですが、ずいぶん前からこの話が
So I have a question about the
依然メディアを通してというような形と、あとホームページですか。こちらの
forms of the media. So could we use a very simple language to spread the message clearer? So what kind of a promotion plan do we have for the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Game?
最近も
So standing at this point,
行ったりですね、
we have a lot of the discussions.
テレビに、積極的に登場したり、
So this is a very rare situation when so many different national television is going to report to us. But so far, the situation, the way they have done these things is very different. For the media, they are not prepared for such a
じゃあ後ろ
situation.
中畑の三浦と申します。すみません、バスの件なんですけれども、ちょっと確認なんです
So
け
the
ど
question is about the buses.
総人数、延べではなく総人数と、この方々はワクチンはどのような計画になっているんでしょうか。
So for the bus drivers, what is the vaccination situation?
出てますけれども、
はい
総人数っていうのは出されているのかということが知り
So how many bus drivers do we have from the bus group? And are they all inoculated?
ワクチンの接種は具体的な計画は持てているんでしょうか。
Do we have any ratio or any number for the vaccinations of the bus drivers?
ことですか。場所とかどこで打つかとかってそういうことですか。
というか、その方々に全員ワクチンを組織委員会の方から
So is also by a bus driver inoculated or not?
いろいろ課題がありますのでね、検討しているっていう。
Since we have different forms, but after a very detailed discussion, we have drawn a conclusion.
対象をどういう対象にするのか、それワクチンとして我々として
So for the vaccination,
使うことができるワクチンの量がどのぐらいなのか、まずそれがはっきりしておりません。
so we need to calculate how many vaccines do we have at our hand. And later on, we are going to come up with a plan for the vaccinations of the bus drivers.
例えばボランティアを全員やることができるのかどうか、コントラクター全員やる
So we should also think about whether we can inoculate all the volunteers. This logic also applies to the bus drivers.
その全員が手を挙げる積
But
極的にね我々が対応しなきゃいけない
if all the people is raising up their hand for the vaccination,
方もいるかもしれません。その他大規模接種会場で接種を受ける人もいるかもしれま
we
せん。
should think about the situations of the athletes.
対象の人数のうちどこまでを我々が対応し
So
なきゃいけな
I
いのかという
believe
ことも
after a very detailed calculation, we are going to be sure
しないといかんってことになります。
about the inoculation.
ことなので
This is the most difficult part.
のはそういうことなんですね。ちょっと検討
This is not something that we can draw a conclusion immediately.
時間的な
Just as you have
制限も
mentioned,
ありますので、できるだけ早くやりたい。
we do have some sign up some contract with them to force them to be inoculated.
競技場に選手用と観客用2台、大規模会場はもう少し配置するそうですが、
In the Tokyo Prefecture, we have specially divided the areas for the major purpose of the usage of the athletes and also the usage of the media and also the visitors and the volunteers. So how will we better design the route or the contact between the athletes?
2台というのはそのスタンバイしてるっていうことなんですね。
So I think there are some of the, I think the backup plans or the backup personnel is still standby.
ベッドあるわけです。ですから問題はその、もちろん
The question
救急の患者がですねどのくらい出てくるか
is not only about the patient.
今のお話に対して我々が
Another problem is that we should think about whether the time can match the result that we have designed. Definitely, we have some of the patients suffered from the heat wave, and some of the patients is also suffered from other different disease, and we should try our best to accommodate their situation, and we should also try to strike a balance between these different medical demands. That is my opinion. Thank you.
乗務員の人数はちょっと今手元に数字がないので答え方も含めてちょっと予想に聞けますかね。
So later on, we are going to give you a very detailed numbers of the bus driver.
輸送。わかります。
1日あたりですと最大で2800人でございますので、それでご理解いただけるかと思います。
So I understand for every day we can inoculate 2,800 people. Is that understand correct? Is that concept correct? So I also want to understand. So how many bus drivers are in the venue, are working in the venue? It is also the same question together with the bus. So how long will this bus driver works every day? They need to work from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day, right? That is my understanding, and they are going to be divided into 2 shifts. It seems like they are working in such a schedule. If that is a fact, can you give me that number, and how will we better protect the bus driver? So you are asking about the shift of the bus driver. I think I'm going to answer your question after a very detailed research. I am from Mika Sports, and I am Hayama. For the members of the management committee, do you reach any agreement of the packagings of the bottled water in the conference room? And so, of course, we need further explanation. I think before the openings of the meeting, of the games, we are going to give you a better explanation. Definitely after the Tokyo Olympic game. I think before the Tokyo 2020 Olympic game, we are actually, the majority of the decision is going to be made by the temporary standing committee of the GOC. That is how the decision is being made. So I am from Reuters. I have another follow-up question about the GPS. So the GPS only tracks the journalist from the media, or are the GPS tracker only being installed in the can also be installed on the suppliers and
入国する海外から
sponsors?
入国される
So let me
メディア
give you further explanations for those of the journalists from the media group. And if they are arriving in Japan from an overseas country, they need to wear the GPS tracker.
方は対象になる
That is a requirement from Japan. Is it okay? Can you understand? That is to say, how about the sponsors? If they come from another country, are them going to be installed with a GPS tracker? And so the GPS tracker is not only should be installed on the media, on the journalist, they should also be installed on the sponsors, the person who is from the sponsoring company.
ごめんなさい、ごめんなさい。ご質問の趣旨は、海外から来る人は、
Let me re-explain once
例え
again.
ばパートナーも含めて、その先ほどの帯同とか GPS の対象になるかというご質問でした。
そうですね。最初の3日間については毎日検査を受験いただいて、厳格な管理と。
So I think for those of the overseas journalists, if they come to Japan, and the first 3 days they are going to went through a very requiring or very demanding examinations about their physical condition, and later on, if they enter into Japan, they are going to be installed. Their smartphone is going to be installed some of the GPS.
I could do a briefing later. Yeah, he answered that, so I could do a briefing later. いやいや、大丈夫です。はい。ごめんなさい、なんかちょっと混ざっちゃって。はい、じゃあすみません、部屋の中以上とさせていただいて、
Since we have answered all the questions from the floor,
中安さん、もし回答が来てたら、はい。
はい、ちょっとおっしゃったその勤務シフトが事実かどうかっていうのは、ちょっと今私が連絡した限りでは、数字まで。
So you are asked the questions about the shift of the bus drivers.
はい、大体まあ多分事実なんじゃないかという感じでありました。それで
I think it is the truth. And definitely we divided the shift for the daytime and for night shift.
のようなんですけれども、まあ会場にですね、深夜残ってですね。
And inside of the venue, definitely somebody, a bus driver is going to wait on side of the venue for the next shift or the next demand or next need submitted by the estates or the national teams, and we need to be very well prepared for that. And for the difference, definitely I think that we have our priorities and we are going to follow the orders of the priority list. Thank you very much. Let us answer some of the questions online. The first question is that it's also about the media. This is a question about the vaccinations of the journalists from the media. I think that we have answered the question. We have some requirements. And I believe that once the journalist has entered into our country, they are going to be under a very close observation to make sure that all of them is in very good health condition. The next question is from Mr. Simon from the Washington Post. In today's background information release, you mentioned that is around 100,000 people. 90% of them has been inoculated. Can you further explain the numbers and details behind that? I think that I'm going to give you a more detailed explanations.
公表されているものです。
This is a data being published by Professor Nagata from Tokyo University. If you have any further information that you need to ask, you should ask Professor Nagata, and he is going to give you a very clear answer. There are so many different foreign participants arriving in Japan. So, what do you estimate that the overseas arrivals is going to impact the newly confirmed cases in Japan? And what I can tell you is that if there is no single visitor from other countries, I believe the current COVID-19 momentum should be kept at the same momentum. And if the foreign visitors is coming to Japan, the infected number is only going to rise. It's going to rise for every 1,000. For every 1,000 people in Tokyo Prefecture, we are actually only going to see 1 people's plus if the foreign visitor arrive in Japan. That is the latest data and some of the model simulation result that we have done. So can you give us more brief introduction toward the sports-related medics? And currently, we have recruited around. We are going to select 200 sports doctors from the 400 sports doctors that submitted their application. And I am not sure whether these 200 sports doctors is a definite number. Let me explain further. The first one is that among all the doctors we prepared for the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, 90% of them are not are not doctors for the sports. So that is to say, the 200 sports doctors is only 10% of the doctors. So we are not sure about the final result. But in the venue, we should have the awareness for the medical treatment. And we are also going to use we are going to make all-out effort to be very well prepared for the medical emergency. That is the logic behind our thinking. Since we have 10% of the doctors who are the sport-related doctors. So there are going to be 200. There's going to be 200 of them. So from the number, I think this number should be very enough for the demand of the game. So this is a question from Murakami of the Reuters News. I heard there's a news about the Japanese government is actually having an internal meetings of whether they are going to accept the athletes from countries including Malaysia, Britain, and India. For those countries is actually suffering from those countries is actually suffering from a very bad situation of the COVID-19. I have never heard such a news. We are not going to forbid any entrance from any single countries that you mentioned. Definitely, we heard some of the athletes is actually from the India, and they are coming from the regions where the mutant virus has been spreading. But I required all the athletes should be inoculated for the different countries in India, Pakistan, and also Philippines. I believe they are under the common requirement of IOC. All the athletes entered from these countries is going to be inoculated, and that is the requirement and the policies toward them. And this is a question from Jamie. For the requirement of the visitors or the audience, do we have any requirement? Are there any requirements that you are discussing? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Thank you. So far, we have not decided what is going to be the form of the audience, who is going to sit on the audience seat, or whether there should be anyone sitting on the audience seats. We are still under discussion about that, but the general principle behind that is just as what I have mentioned to you before. So the governmental principle is that we should follow the national requirement about that. Imagine that you are attending one smart game only held in Japan. That is going to be the requirement for the audience so far. But I believe as we are proceeding forward, I'm going to give you a very detailed requirement together with the IOC, IPC, and the 6 stakeholding parties. And for the timing, we are approaching the middle of June. We are trying our best to decide it. This is also my wish, but we have not decided anything yet. So we have answered all the questions. Thank you very much for attending today's presser. Thank you very much, and we are going to conclude today's presser.